So today we're going to talk about designing and building a mentoring program. Before we talked about the basics of mentoring, and now we're going to talk about what we actually need to do. That's coming up now. And this is the HR Hub podcast with me, Andrea Adams. Keep listening to learn about this topic and all kinds of things related to HR. You can also find me on YouTube. Today, my guest is Laura Lundsford. Laura has literally written the book about mentoring. Her book was one of the first that appeared when I went looking for someone to talk to about this subject because it's been on my list for a long time. She's also a professor and assistant dean at Campbell University. Hi, Laura. How are you?
It's great to be here. I'm great. Thank you.
Well, I'm so glad to have you. Like I said, that last episode was just so satisfying. Anyway, okay. So, somewhat picking up where we left off. I'm not going to recap that. People can go back and listen or watch that. I wanted to start with this one question I didn't cover then, was the idea that most mentors that I know of are found informally. It's kind of a chemistry thing. How do you formalize chemistry?
That's a great question because people think it's magic. You know, there's just sort of this magical element, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And how could you tweak that magic powder and sprinkle it over everyone for a program? But it ends up that it's not all that magic. I mean, I'm a psychologist by training, and we study things like, well, what is the magic? And that's how I actually got started in mentoring relationships and research is what makes them work? What's in that black box that we say is chemistry? And it ends up that it's a couple of things. One is that there's some shared goals and interests. And the other, there's some shared similarities around communication styles and values. When you compare informal mentoring to mentoring programs, informal mentoring is better. However, when you control for how good the program is, that difference really changes. So well-designed mentoring programs are just as good as informal. It just means there's a lot of poorly designed mentoring programs out there that don't really prepare people or think through how to help them connect based on their needs and interests. So that really is the driver, and I would say the magic is that you've got something that I'm really interested in, and we're able to connect, and I trust you, and we have similar communication styles. So we are able to make some progress on that together.
Mm-hmm. I think it would be pretty easy, I would think, to identify those goals, that you have shared goals in one way or another, because that's really easy to write down and reflect on. But communication style and values, how do you if in a formal program, how do you map people up? How do you even identify that so you can match them up?
Well, it's interesting you say that about goals. Some people are really good at being able to identify them, but especially new employees are not so good at it. And they aren't sure. They're like, well, I'm kind of trying to figure out, should I go in this direction or that direction? Or I'm not really even sure what the options are. So sometimes, depending on the program, you might have to help them work out their goal list to figure out some of their goals. But let's just assume they are able to come in and say, hey, here's really what I'm hoping for. Communication styles are things like, are you a procrastinator or are you more ahead? Like, so when we plan a meeting, do you wait till the last minute or do we like to be more planful? It also is on, do you like to text or talk on the phone? Are you okay in person or Zoom? So there's just some preferences that people have that are important for them to just sort of get out there in the front and make sure they're communicating well. For example, email. Some people just don't really respond to email, but if I'm emailing you because that's what I use and you keep ignoring me, I'm thinking you're not interested in me. And it's just not really a way that you communicate about meeting, for example. So that's important. And then values can be things like, what I'm valuing in this particular profession, what's really important and motivating to me. And there's ways to, people spend a lot of time trying to match some people on some similarities. But part of it is you don't want them to be too similar, because if they're similar on everything, you might not have the kind of growth and friction that's necessary for people to learn about different routes to being successful.
But even 10 years ago, that would have been a really hard question for me Do you have tools, or can you refer somebody to tools that would help them uncover that?
Absolutely. And a lot of programs, they'll have an application where they'll ask them some questions about those kinds of preferences and then use that to make maybe some preliminary matches. The other way programs do it is I might ask you as the mentor to describe some things about yourself and your own values and communication preferences. And then we let mentees go and look at that, those bios or descriptions or web pages, and rank, here's my top 3 people I'd like to be paired with. And we know that when the mentee has some say, it actually tends to go better when they feel that there's some, action that they have in terms of selecting the person. Or even if you make an assignment to say, hey, this is a preliminary assignment, meet once and let me know if you want to go forward.
I feel like that meet and then, confirm whether or not it's going to work. I feel like most people are just going to say, well, yeah, I probably will. I mean, I haven't really given it enough time yet. And they'll default to yes, even if it honestly probably feels like a no.
Well, some people don't. They might say, hey, you know what? You want to meet every week and I don't have that kind of time. So there might be somebody who's better for you. Or they find, hey, I really wanted to learn about, becoming a clinical psychologist. And I'll go, I'm not that kind of psychologist. So I probably am not the right person for you. So interestingly, sometimes they can find out in that first meeting, they can clarify some things that the mentor often will go, I'm not really ready to fulfill that expectation or competent. Let's find you someone else.
Okay. Are there guidelines for that first conversation? There must be. They're probably in your book.
Yes, there are some in my book about, and certainly at that first conversation, it's all about building rapport, getting to know the person, knowing what they're expecting, how they want to be different, at the end of the program. And then I was just actually working with someone today. She sent me that there's things called mentoring compacts, and programs will have those. So I suggested she develop one for her program, and I was editing it for her today. And it had these kinds of things, after you first meet, what are 1 to 3 goals that you have? Describe your communication preferences. List when your first 7 meetings are going to be and how you'll communicate if you need to change those. So this is sort of getting at some of those communication preferences and goals by just saying, hey, here's some things we'd like you to discuss and share. Okay. And then they both sign it at the bottom. The mentoring compact are pretty common tools programs might use.
I'm maybe jumping the gun by some of those questions. Can you walk through the steps of building a program? And can I guess what I think your first step is going to be?
Yes. What is it?
Uncover the why.
Clarify your why. You've got it. After doing the literally workshops for hundreds of people, I've broken it down to 5 steps, which anyone can understand if they've inherited a program, they're trying to build one from scratch, or they've got something and they think it could be better. And the first is identify the why. Why are you doing it? What are these goals? Checking with your stakeholders. Do they all have the same shared idea about the why? Amazingly, sometimes people don't. Participants might have a really different idea about what that program is supposed to be about than the organization. So, identifying that why is the absolute first step, and then getting a goal statement out of that. So the goal of the mentoring program is to whatever it is. And there are some resources about outcomes, whether that's retention outcomes or socializing them to the organization or skill building or leadership development, just to really get clear on what they are. Then that gets you to step number 2, which is your theory of change. So you've got a program going to last for, let's say, half a year. You've got some idea about what these people are doing. What are they talking about? What are they engaging in that's going to get that outcome that you desire? And really making explicit about how that's happening. I'll give you an example. I worked with a program once who their outcome was retention. But not one single thing in terms of what they suggested mentors talk about or one activity had anything to do with retention. They let them talk about whatever they wanted. And when we looked at what they talked about, it was never about resources to help them stay. So really making sure you understand or thought through, well, I'm expecting them to talk about this or do this activity together or sponsor them on a difficult assignment at work. Like, what is it that they're going to be doing together that's going to achieve that outcome? That's the theory of change. And it really lays out the activities, how often they should meet, any activities for the whole program, what's happening that's going to drive that change.
Okay.
Then once you've got that step number 3 is recruit and prepare the right participants. So if you know what your goals are, it makes it so much easier to recruit the right people. You want people who want to achieve the goals that are in your program. And so a good self-selection, being really clear on the time commitment and the activities expected, help people make good decisions about opting in. And then preparing them has to do with some mentorship education. There should be some orientation to the program. What are you expecting? Some skill building for mentors and mentees. What does it mean to engage in reflective listening? The biggest question I always get or comment, I do a lot of mentorship education for different groups. I was working with some women who are mentoring women in the power industry, and they said, the biggest thing I'm hearing is I need to learn to listen more rather than just tell my story. And I said, that's absolutely right, because workplaces have changed a lot in the last 30 years, and your story might not work now, but you've got some great skills that might help the mentee really make some progress. So having that education to help mentors understand what's the skill of mentoring, those listening, the rapport building skills.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fourth,
can I
yes, go ahead.
Dwell on that a little bit, that as a mentor, you're not just telling your story and then you hear their story, but then you tell your story from another angle and then they raise this other point and then you tell your story from another
angle. You're like, oh, but there was the time that I faced that. Yes. Yeah.
That's a what not to do. You're going to listen to their challenge and then you're going to
ask them what they see the options are right now. Well, what options do you have? And you probably have thought of some options that they could pursue. So if they don't mention one of them, you might sort of ask, well, what about other people who face this? Or is there another time when you faced something similar and that you dealt with it successfully? So you're kind of walking them through how to build the competency to start solving their own problems more effectively. Now, there's certainly a place to share your story. It can be for inspiration, but it was to be at the end. Gosh, it sounds like you have a great plan and something similar happened to me and I could see you fell down, but let me tell you, I fell down, but I picked myself up. There's nothing wrong with sharing it. But when you lead with that, or you're judging their action, that's when there's a problem.
Okay. All right. I think we had finished step 3. Had we?
We're to 3. Yeah. So 4, and this is the one that people hate the most, but it becomes so easy if you've done the first couple right. And that's collect the right data. Because how do you know it's successful? And people hear data and they think they have to write this big research project, and they don't. Or they keep collecting the same surveys that people started 10 years ago that no one looks at. So really collecting the right data is, if you know what activities you're doing and your goals, you ask questions about those things, and then make sure you're sharing at step number 5, your success story. You want to share that data back with people who are participating. One, it helps you recruit really effective new people by hearing some of these stories or sharing some of the data. Like 95% of our participants were promoted within the year after they participated, right? That's very compelling for people to want to be involved. And to also telling your stakeholders, because your organization's investing resources and money. So the way to sustain that and not get cut because there's a new boss is you're showing, hey, you spent this much, but look, I improved our retention. And those all have money attached to them in business. We can calculate them quite easily. We know it costs 1.5 times someone's salary to replace them. So typically, if you can save one person, you've paid for your mentoring program. So being able to tell that success story is step number 5 and really crucial for sustainability.
Absolutely. We should take that away for so many of the programs we implement. But yes, I know that, especially in HR, we find the whole data gathering and meeting the data needs of our stakeholders challenging. Okay.
Tedious. Yes, it can feel tedious.
Oh, it feels tedious, but also so often it just, well, then they're like, but what about this number and what about that number and what about this angle and that angle, and it gets a bit frustrating anyways, but necessary. And I like the story approach. So ethical considerations when building a mentoring program. This wasn't actually something I thought about, but something you mentioned to me in an earlier conversation. What are some ethical considerations that we should be thinking about?
Well, ethics doesn't always come to mind when we think about mentoring, but most of us in our own disciplines, we have ethical obligations and expectations. And there's some interesting signatories. Now there's some ethical principles around mentorship that the European Mentoring Coaching and Council and the International Mentoring Association have signed off on. So having some competencies around ethics. A couple of the big ones are, especially for companies, are to be really aware of their processes and procedures, especially around sexual harassment. Sometimes people aren't aware that if someone discloses something to me in a mentorship, that I might have an obligation or duty to report that legally. And so clarifying early on what is protected and not. I mean, this isn't a counseling or lawyer relationship. This is just a work relationship, and not everything is protected. And so helping people understand that and have a plan so that they're not caught off guard or sued later is really important. There's also, and there's some very interesting stories about people who have been sued. Stanford University, for example, had an alumni student mentoring program that resulted in lawsuits because of their failure to check some illegal behavior that happened on the part of the male mentor towards the female mentee. So these things happen, and you don't want to be on the front page of a newspaper for that. So making sure people are aware of those policies and they apply to these relationships. And then there's some interesting things. My friend Brad Johnson writes a lot about ethics and mentorship around what's confidential. What does it mean to promote autonomy so that the person's just not dependent on you? What is it about making sure they have equal access to opportunities? Sometimes we might find out in a mentoring relationship that, we might make a judgment. Well, they're not really ready for this opportunity. But if we hadn't been mentoring them, we wouldn't know that. And so we really want to ethically be fair to people and we're mentoring them and make sure they have equal access also. And then some things around.
Are you saying, sorry, can I just jump in there? Are you saying that, like, so you've got a position vacant, somebody applies, but it's never been mentored, so you don't have all that insight from the mentoring. Somebody who has been mentored applies, but they have deep insight into the person's abilities. And the person who was mentored gets excluded because we have that insight, whereas the other person.
That's right. Yes, that's exactly right. Or I've seen cases where they're not recommended for something because they're like, well, I'm not sure they're ready for that. And it's like, well, but what do you know about these other people?
Yeah,
so really
totally.
making sure that you're not, or if you do that, you have a conversation with your mentee about it. So, hey, I don't think you're ready, but I just wanted to share that with you for this reason. At least have some conversation so the person can go, well, actually, I think I am ready for these reasons. So just not making these unilateral decisions that we would say that's a bit unethical. And then making sure that they're better off from being in the relationship with you, not worse off. So those that are also really important considerations people don't always think about. And that's what you can do in preparing your participants. So making sure mentees and mentors are aware of these ethical obligations up front. Sexual attraction is another one. In cross-gender relationships, people might even have it or they might perceive it of another group, right? There's this movement. Sometimes men are like, well, I'm not going to be in a room with a woman. Well, but you'd be in a room with a man in a mentoring relationship. So what is that about? So thinking through, like, for example, if you're a male mentor saying, hey, you know what? I meet for lunch with my mentees, whether they're men or women, and just making that known. So there's not this sort of talk about, oh, he's always going to lunch with her. kind of activity. So thinking sort of ethically through your obligations.
That's politically savvy. Well, sometimes I wish we didn't have to think about those things, but we do. I've run into people who say things like that as well.
It's part of organizational life. And I knew someone once who said, if they don't actually know anything about you, they'll make it up. So we just have to be politically savvy about some of that. And there's ways to do that in a way that, still provide for effective mentorship in a way that's ethical.
Okay. I would like you to tell us, because I've been part of a formal mentoring program. I don't know how successful it was. But can you tell a story about a successful program that was formal, put into place, and what that was like, the goals and the results and all that kind of thing?
Sure. Well, this isn't necessarily a work one, but one of the longest running mentoring programs in the world is Big Brothers Big Sisters. And it's focused on youth mentoring. It's been around for over 100 years, and they certainly have mentors who are working adults. So I would say that's an incredibly successful program, and they're very clear about their goals. They want to keep kids in school and get them through high school and help them feel that they have a trusted adult that they can confide in. And they do lots of great things to achieve that. And I think we could take a lot of lessons from that to business. JP Morgan has developed a really interesting approach that they have formalized throughout their company. And it's a different kind of way to think of a program. So they have the 36-minute challenge. Have you heard of this?
No.
So they actually, I'll send you the link. They have a very interesting website where they say, we want you to spend 30 minutes a week having coffee with a talented up-and-coming woman. We want you to spend 5 minutes a week congratulating a female colleague on a win or success, and then spend 1 minute a week talking up the woman who had that win to other colleagues around the firm. And they ask their executive level people to take this commitment. So what they've done is they've institutionalized mentoring, not by saying you've got to go talk to this person or that person, but by really focusing on, in their case, their goal is to move more women up into CEO level roles. And they realized sponsorship is part of that challenge there. So this sort of makes that sponsorship and relationship building possible through mentorship through this 36-minute pledge. And no executive could say they didn't have 36 minutes to do that. And when most of that time is even just take them to lunch for half an hour, not even an hour. So I think they have a very successful model for how you can also implement mentoring in your organization.
Oh, isn't that interesting? Okay, that really brings it to life. Okay, same question as last time. Where can someone learn more about all of this?
Oh, well, of course. I have a terrific book on mentoring, The Mentor's Guide.
Yeah.
It really lays out those 5 steps. And I think it's nice because I've done so much work with organizations to sort of really help them think through how to do that. And then there's some other just sort of great resources. There's a number of software companies these days. They don't necessarily, they have more on the management side of how to set it up and some matching. So those are some good resources. They don't always have the program development side as well. But I think they have some nice things for the reporting and matching kinds of things like Inspire, Cronus. I mean, you can just sort of Google and see all the mentoring software platforms out there these days. So those are some good resources as well. Okay, can I add one more thing?
You absolutely can add one more thing.
So people, they join an organization and they quit bad bosses.
I've heard that before. I actually talked to somebody who confirmed that is true.
It is true. And so if you have mentoring support, then there's other people you could talk to figure out, maybe I don't need to leave the organization. Maybe I can move to another place or mitigate some of this so that those people aren't just lost to the organization, because it really is relationships that matter.
Well, thanks, Laura. I love that. Again, I just loved it. The part that I'm reflecting on right now is just the specificity of the why. Being clear about the why you have a program in place, and it isn't sort of airy-fairy like developing. It's just really specific. However, at this point, we have reached the end of this episode and can't talk about this anymore, even if I'd like to. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you next time. I talk shop with another insightful guest.